This wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of our world, a city that once shimmered with gold and blood. Temples where time moved in circles, gods who demanded precision. None of it mattered anymore. First, the songs disappeared. Then, the water from the canals. Then, Moctezuma himself. And then, we disappeared. I am Cuauhtémoc, the last Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan. My voice doesn't come from history. It comes from the ashes. I will tell you how an empire that believed it could not be broken shattered into bone, smoke, and silence. I saw iron eat flesh, fire steal the sky, and gold kill faith. And I know this. This is not just history. It's a warning. Subscribe if you want to know how gods actually die. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from, so we know someone still remembers Tenochtitlan. The sky didn't fall with the roar of battle. It collapsed in the silence that swallowed the city. I saw him one last time, when the sky was still blue and songs still danced in the streets. Moctezuma. He was no longer a man. He was a shadow. His voice, once carved from stone, had cracked, not from death, but from a burden he could no longer carry. 3 days later, the city unraveled. The one we believed could hold back the tide was gone. No one agrees how he died. Some said he was struck by his own people. Others claimed he was murdered by the strangers in his palace. And a few whispered he simply stopped breathing, as if the gods themselves had turned away. And suddenly, I, Cuauhtémoc, stood where no man wanted to stand. There was no crown, no ceremony, only eyes, full of fear and expectation, waiting for someone to speak. The voice we followed was gone. Now we had to find our own. The streets trembled. Friends became threats. Allies looked like thieves. And we, those who still believed, were all that stood between order and ruin. Moctezuma had become silence, and I became the voice left behind. This is not the story of how we conquered death. It's how we named it and made it ours. The city was already drowning in sparks and blood. I was its last witness. From the temple steps, I saw the so-called Messiah arrive. But hell had already taken root beneath our skin. No one screamed because fear was louder than any voice. When Moctezuma died, Tenochtitlan ignited in rage. Our people no longer feared gods, and certainly not men in iron. The city revolted. Stones, fire, spears. The invaders were surrounded. The Spanish were trapped, cut off in the heart of the city. Their only hope, escape. They waited for night, and night brought rain. It was the night of June 30th to July 1st, 1520. The sky vanished behind thunder, rain flooded the canals, and Tenochtitlan gleamed with fury. I knew they no longer saw us as gods, and no longer believed they were invincible. "They're going to flee," said the warrior beside me. I nodded. "Gold doesn't fly, it sinks." "So we drown them?" I looked at him. "We won't drown them, we just won't let them breathe." Cortez led them out, across a narrow bridge linking the city to the mainland. He walked like a commander, but his men, burdened with gold, trophies, idols, walked like ghosts, because every piece of treasure was weighing them down. "Just be quiet," they whispered to each other. "No fight, just walk." But there's no silence in a city that remembers pain. We waited, on rooftops, in the water, under the bridges. And when the first boot touched the planks, we struck. Fire doesn't need flame to destroy. That night, we burned them without fire, just spears, arrows, and fury that had learned precision. One Spaniard slipped and fell into the canal. Then 5 more followed. They sank, dragged down by sacks of gold. He drowned with his treasure, someone laughed beside me. Gold ruins everything it touches. Cortés ran, still pretending he was leading, but his men stumbled, dropped cannons, tore off their armor, ripped open bags of loot just to survive. Survive, though they had turned our city into a graveyard of gods. Spanish, Tlaxcalans, mercenaries, all in the same waters. We stood on the banks, and this time we didn't ask for mercy. One soldier crawled through the mud, bleeding, gasping, and saw me, his eyes empty, terrified. This is your night," he stammered. I looked down. "No," I said. "This is our memory." By morning, the canal was full of bodies. Some still stared, as if trying to find a way out. Some had mouths full of gold. None of them breathed. When you steal from the gods, don't try to run with your hands full. We won the night. But curses don't vanish that easily. Cortés didn't disappear. He retreated, and he would return with a war the world had never seen. First, the noise dies, then the smoke, then the water. When Cortés returned, he was no longer a soldier. He was a storm made from broken loyalties. He didn't have an army anymore. He had alliances. Thousands of Tlaxcalans, dozens of old enemies. Tribes who once trembled at our name now marched behind him. They cut off the aqueducts, dug trenches, blocked every stream that fed the island. We drank from puddles, from rain, from broken jars. "Cuauhtémoc, the temples run dry," said the priest. "Then drink from strength," I answered. They built floating beasts, brigantines with sails and cannons. They crushed our canoes like insects. Our city, once an island fortress, was now a trap of our own making. Every day was a battle, not for victory, for crumbs, a fistful of maize. "Mother, I'm hungry," whispered a child outside the temple, and the mother, long dried of milk, only had prayers to give. People chewed leather, gnawed bark from trees, boiled roof tiles, hoping some memory of food still clung to them. I stood tall, because if the voice falls, everything else follows. They've hit from the north again. The Death Temple is gone. The canal isn't ours anymore. Iron walks our streets. There's fire in the shrine. Cuauhtémoc, what now? I said nothing, because not every answer is a word. Sometimes it's just standing. We fought, without food, without water, without shadows left, only ash. The city held not because it could, but because we no longer remembered how to surrender. When no more blood is offered to the gods, they either die or take revenge. And then all that's left is one last temple, one last fire, one last emperor. Some things do not burn, but smoke can still kill what should have been immortal. It was August 1521. The siege had dragged on for over 2 months. Cortés attacked from all sides, north, south, and by water. His brigantines glided through our canals like serpents trained in war, armed with fire. First fell the southern quarters, Coyohuacan and Coyoapan. Then the north, only the center remained. Templo Mayor, the sacred heart of an empire. The sun hung like a furnace. Air tasted of the dead. I climbed the temple steps, once walked by priests in feathered cloaks, by dancers, by flutes, by hearts held high for the gods. Now only burnt feathers, wet stone, and silence pressing on my ribs. "The priests have left," said a guard beside me. "Why?" "They say the gods are silent." I entered. Inside, ruins. The altar cracked in half. Walls once carved with names of days, now smudged with soot. A priest sat on the ground, holding a shard of a stone blade. "They've left us," he whispered. "We didn't bring them blood that day, so they left." "No," I told him. "Gods do not leave. They are taken." The attack began at dawn. The Spanish came from the northeast. They carried not only weapons, but blasphemy. Their crosses where our masks should be, their fires where our music once rose. The first cannon shattered the eastern tower. The second collapsed the roof. When the altar of Huitzilopochtli, our god of sun and war, fell to rubble, the air changed, as if someone had blown out a flame that had burned for centuries. The priests disappeared. Some took their own lives. Some vanished into the canals. Some broke their knives and became ash themselves. I stood in the wreckage, and there was nowhere else to go. We didn't scream. We stood like mourners, because what collapsed was not stone. It was our axis of the world. From that moment on, I stopped counting days. There was no longer a calendar worth finishing. Templo Mayor had fallen to ashes. But I remained, and they decided to study the last thing left. My body, my voice, my dignity. They didn't want to destroy a temple. They came to break an emperor. When they no longer fear you, they begin to break you. August 13th, 1521, Tenochtitlan fell. I, Cuauhtémoc, stood among the ruins where a palace once rose, now dust and blood. They captured me near the Tlatelolco Canal. I had tried to lead the last of our people onto boats. Any escape. They didn't stop me with a spear. They stopped me with a look. Cortez stared at me like a riddle. I stared at him like a sentence. "This is your end," one Spaniard said. "No," I replied. "This is just history holding its breath." He ordered my robe removed. Chains were fastened around my wrists, not like a prisoner, but like a trophy. The fires of the city still flickered, and in silence he extended his own hands, as mine were bound before the crowd. I didn't look away. They took me to what used to be a temple. Now it was a tribunal. Cortez sat like a god, bored of sacrifices. "Where is the gold?" he asked. I said nothing. "You're the last who knows." "I'm the last who didn't sell himself," I replied. Then came the part that turned into legend. Torture. They tied me and my advisor, Tlaltequelel, to wooden benches. Hot coals were placed beneath our feet. Fire-kissed skin. It cracked, it flaked, it bled. But I stayed silent. "Speak! Where's the treasure?" someone shouted. "They'll melt your bones." "Let them. Words don't have a melting point," I said. Tlaltequelel screamed. His eyes rolled back into his skull. Cortez watched silently. His face wasn't cruel. It was empty. I looked at him, and I saw defeat. He had power, but no heart. "Do you regret anything?" a soldier asked. "Only one thing," I said, "that I didn't burn sooner, so I wouldn't have to see the world surrender." They didn't kill me after. They kept me, as a trophy, as a symbol, as ash that refused to become dust. Because chains aren't the worst. The worst is when truth is shackled and chooses to remain silent, like I did. The city was gone. The body was broken. But the last thing to die is memory, and they didn't know that inside me was a spark that one day would ignite again. Empires don't die all at once. First the heart, then the language, then the names. After the torture, they kept me near Cortez, a shadow, a symbol. They took me wherever they went to show the other tribes, look, your God has fallen. But they didn't see defeat. They saw silence. Sometimes silence is the loudest scream. I wasn't allowed to speak, but I had eyes. And when I looked at children wearing foreign trinkets, speaking a broken tongue, unaware of their ancestors, I knew my war wasn't over. At night, when all slept, I remembered the smell of wet stone after rain, the voice of the temple, the rhythm of our calendar. Now counting nothing, they housed me in Coyoacan, a villa, spacious, quiet, with beautiful trees, but no tree knew who I was. You are no longer an emperor, said a missionary once. You are former. I smiled. A true emperor is one who is never forgotten. They sometimes invited me to councils. The Spaniards pretended to listen. I pretended to care. But my thoughts remained with those who were no longer there. I traced symbols on walls, sometimes in the air, because memory is its own language. One young boy of the Mexica brought me an old mask with shards of turquoise. He didn't know whose it was. It was in my grandfather's cave. I thought it might be yours. I took it. It smelled of temples, of blood, of greatness. I pressed the mask to my chest, and I knew if we vanish, at least this remains. And one day, someone will ask, who were they, the ones who wore this? And that will be the beginning of our second story. Cortez took me south, chasing new lands, new gold. But I knew he had already lost everything that mattered. For even if the body breaks, memory seeps into stone, and stone always finds its way home. You can destroy an empire, but if someone remembers the words, it will return. 1524. Cortez marched south into what he called the Honduras expedition. He wanted new lands, new gold, new glory, but he didn't travel alone. He brought something not as a prisoner, but as a burden, me. Why do you bring the emperor in chains? They asked him. Because dead gods stay quieter when you can see them, he said. We crossed jungles, weeks, months, through snakes, disease, rain, fever. He lost soldiers, but never took his eyes off me, and I remained silent, because I knew this wasn't his road, it was my last walk. Are you still not afraid? He asked one night. No, I said, because I have become what you fear most. And what's that? Memory. February 28, 1525. In the jungles of Tabasco, Cortez ordered my execution, officially for conspiracy, truthfully for defiance. Before the rope, I asked only one thing. Let my body touch the soil, so the land knows I have returned. They gave me no honors, but in the earth where my breath ended, a new voice had already begun. The empire was gone, but my name remained, Cuauhtémoc. He who descends like an eagle, they painted me on walls, sang me in songs, whispered me into lullabies. When someone was afraid, they remembered me. When someone endured, they heard my name. There is death that takes, and death that leaves a silence where dignity can grow. This was the last song of an emperor, but not the final page, because Cortez still had one more journey to make, and next time, the world wouldn't stay silent. Subscribe to hear the next chapter. Cortez, the man who thought he had conquered everything. And tell us in the comments, what struck you the most about Cuauhtémoc's story? Because a voice repeated out loud becomes memory.